all set in motion by one woman's desperate quest to rebuild her life after a devastating farm foreclosure left her pregnant and with nothing but overwhelming debt. A chance discovery that would eventually bring NASA scientists to her rural radio station, trigger emergency meetings at SETI headquarters, and ultimately reveal extraterrestrial communications that had been hidden for over 25 years. Transmissions that contradicted everything astronomers and government officials thought they knew about intelligent life beyond our planet. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light filtered through the dusty windows of KCRW Radio as 34-year-old Sarah Mitchell stood in the empty broadcast studio, trying to convince herself she hadn't just made the biggest mistake of her life. The keys felt impossibly heavy in her trembling hand. Keys to a business that had failed 3 times in the past 8 years, in a building that looked like it hadn't seen a proper renovation since the 1980s. Just 14 months earlier, Sarah had been living what many would consider an idyllic rural life. She and her ex-husband Daniel owned Mitchell Family Farms, operating 3 successful organic properties in Oregon's fertile Willamette Valley. Their farming business had built a solid reputation for sustainable agriculture with innovative growing techniques, specializing in heirloom vegetables and specialty grains that attracted loyal farmers, market customers, and high-end restaurant accounts. Sarah handled all the crop development and field operations, spending her days implementing regenerative farming practices and seasonal planting schedules that had earned her recognition in Pacific Northwest Farmer magazine as one of the region's rising agricultural entrepreneurs. Her famous heirloom tomatoes, with their vibrant colors and rich flavors, had become legendary among local food enthusiasts, and her innovative growing techniques regularly appeared in agricultural journals across the Pacific Northwest. Daniel managed the business operations, marketing, and finances that kept their 3 farms running smoothly. Together, they had built something remarkable from nothing, starting with Sarah's grandfather's farming techniques and Daniel's business degree from Oregon State University. They had met in 2016 at a farmer's market, where Sarah was selling produce while establishing her first small farm. Daniel was immediately impressed with her agricultural knowledge and entrepreneurial spirit. "You should be running a much larger operation," he had told her that day, business card in hand. "I could help you build something special," and they had. By 2018, they had acquired their first 20-acre property near Eugene. By 2020, they had expanded to 3 locations across Oregon's Willamette Valley, with plans to launch a value-added product line of specialty sauces and preserves. By 2022, they owned a beautiful farmhouse on 40 acres, were expecting their first child together, and had begun discussing creating an agricultural education center that could share their sustainable farming methods with a wider audience. Sarah's commitment to heirloom varieties and organic growing methods had created a loyal following that kept their farm stands busy even during traditionally slow seasons. Her seasonal CSA program became anticipated events, with customers eagerly awaiting each new harvest. The farming business was equally successful. Local restaurants booked their produce months in advance. Weekend farm tours required reservations weeks ahead. Their largest property generated nearly $1.9 million in annual revenue, with profit margins well above industry averages thanks to Sarah's careful crop planning and Daniel's tight operational controls. Daniel had always been the numbers person, the one who negotiated land leases, managed payroll, and handled the increasingly complex logistics of running multiple agricultural properties. Sarah trusted him completely with the financial aspects of their operation, focusing her energy on soil quality, staff training, and maintaining the consistency that had built their reputation. That trust, Sarah would later realize, had been catastrophic. The first sign of trouble came in February 2023 when their primary seed supplier began demanding payment upon delivery instead of the net 45 terms they had enjoyed for years. Daniel had explained it as a temporary cash flow issue. Several large equipment purchases and irrigation system upgrades had created a short-term shortage that would resolve itself within weeks. "It's just timing," he had assured Sarah when she questioned why they suddenly couldn't afford to pay vendors on schedule. "The winter season was slower than projected, and we front-loaded expenses for the new greenhouse. Everything will normalize once the spring planting season picks up." But the cash flow problems didn't normalize. By April, they were juggling payments, delaying orders, and Daniel was spending increasing amounts of time on calls with creditors, explaining why payments would be just a few days late while working out extended payment schedules. Sarah began noticing other warning signs that Daniel dismissed as temporary complications. Their business checking account balance seemed to fluctuate wildly from day to day. Staff paychecks that should have cleared were bouncing. Equipment lease payments that had been automatic for years were suddenly requiring manual intervention. The devastating truth emerged on May 15, 2023, a Monday that started like any other, but ended with Sarah's entire world collapsing. She had arrived at their main farm at 5:30 a.m. to begin preparation for a large restaurant delivery, a weekly order for 5 farm-to-table establishments that represented one of their most valuable recurring clients. The order required specialized harvesting and packaging for 300 pounds of mixed produce, a project that demanded Sarah's personal attention to maintain the quality standards the clients expected. At 9:30 a.m., as Sarah was directing her staff through the final stages of packaging, 2 women in suits appeared at the farmhouse door. She assumed they were early customers, or perhaps representatives from the Organic Certification Agency, scheduled to visit later that week. "Are you Sarah Mitchell?" the taller woman asked, producing official-looking paperwork. "We're here to secure the premises on behalf of First National Bank of Oregon." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah stared at the documents in confusion. There must be some mistake. "Our business accounts are in good standing. My husband handles all the finances and everything is up to date. Ma'am, according to our records, Mitchell Family Farms is 5 months behind on agricultural loan payments, totaling $412,000. We have authorization to secure all business assets immediately." The next hour was a nightmare of desperate phone calls to Daniel, who didn't answer, while the bank representatives systematically inventoried equipment and informed staff that the farm would be closing permanently, effective immediately. Sarah watched in horror as delivery trucks were turned away. Staff were told they couldn't continue working, and the gates to her flagship farm were locked with her still inside. Daniel finally returned her calls at 11:45 a.m., just as the bank representatives were finishing their inventory and preparing to change the locks. "Sarah, I can explain everything." His voice carried a strain she had never heard before. "I've been trying to fix this without worrying you. I just needed more time to make it all work." "Make what work?" "Daniel, the bank just shut down our farm in the middle of harvest." "What's happening?" Sarah's voice barely managed to form the words, one hand protectively covering her 6-month pregnant belly. The truth emerged in fragments over the following hours, each revelation more devastating than the last. Daniel had been investing in cryptocurrency, initially just occasional trades that he characterized as diversifying their assets. But casual investing had evolved into a serious obsession that consumed increasing amounts of money. When his crypto losses began exceeding their personal savings, Daniel had convinced himself that bigger investments would allow him to recover everything. He had secretly taken cash advances on their business credit cards, diverting funds from daily operations. To support his habit, telling himself that one good market rally would restore everything he had borrowed. When credit card advances weren't sufficient, Daniel had forged Sarah's signature to secure second mortgages on their properties, extracting over $350,000 in equity that he was certain he could double with the right investment strategy. When that money disappeared in a market crash, he had begun skipping loan payments and vendor bills, using operating funds to cover investment losses, while promising himself that the next market upswing would solve everything. "I had a system," Daniel explained through tears that afternoon as they sat in their empty farmhouse surrounded by inventory lists prepared by the bank representatives. "I was so close to making it big, Sarah. Just a few more good trades, and I could have paid everything back. But there was no system, and there would be no making it big." Over 11 months, Daniel had investment losses totaling nearly $1.2 million money that had come from their business accounts, personal savings, home equity, and deferred payments to vendors and creditors. Their business checking accounts were empty, and their personal account contained just enough to cover one more mortgage payment on their farmhouse. Within 2 weeks, the cascade of consequences became unstoppable. All 3 farm properties were seized by creditors. Vendors who had extended credit based on Mitchell family farms' previously excellent payment history began demanding immediate settlement. The landlords of their leased properties filed claims against their personal assets as guarantors of the agricultural leases. Most devastating was the loss of their home. The bank foreclosed when they discovered Daniel had taken a second mortgage. Without disclosing it on recent financial statements, their beautiful farmhouse, the place where they had prepared a nursery with hand-painted murals of growing plants and animals, would be sold at auction within 60 days. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," Daniel said the night they received the foreclosure notice. "I never meant to destroy everything we built. I just got in so deep and I couldn't see any other way out." 3 days later, Daniel left. Sarah found a handwritten note on their kitchen counter alongside divorce papers. He had already signed. "Sarah, I've destroyed everything we worked for, and I can't face what I've done to you and our baby. You deserve a chance to rebuild without carrying the weight of my mistakes. I'm going to stay with my college roommate in Seattle while I try to get help. The divorce will give you protection from any future problems I might cause. I'm so sorry." The note was accompanied by a transfer of his remaining interest in their assets to Sarah. Even in his betrayal, Daniel had tried to ensure that Sarah wouldn't be burdened by any future debts or obligations he might create. Sarah found herself at 34 years old, 6 months pregnant, with nothing but personal belongings: a 2017 Toyota Tacoma with 128,000 miles, and $6,200 from the sale of her grandfather's antique farming tools, the only assets the bankruptcy court had classified as exempt personal property. The tool sale had been particularly painful. Her grandfather's hand-forged implements represented the last tangible connections to the man who had taught Sarah to farm, who had shared family growing techniques and stories about working the land. During the hardest years of the 1960s, but survival required sacrificing sentiment, the $6,200 provided just enough cushion to avoid immediate homelessness while she figured out how to rebuild from nothing. For 5 months, Sarah had lived with her younger brother, Alex, in a small 2-bedroom house in Oak Ridge, Oregon. An arrangement that was supposed to be temporary, but had stretched on as Sarah struggled to find direction for her life. Alex, a forest ranger with the U.S. Forest Service, had generously offered his spare bedroom and emotional support, but the arrangement strained both siblings as weeks turned into months with Sarah's due date approaching. Sarah had taken a job at Green Valley Garden Center, a chain operation that sold mass-produced plants and commercial fertilizers to suburban homeowners. The work paid $16 an hour plus minimal benefits, just enough to cover her share of rent and basic expenses while contributing to Alex's household. But the job was soul-crushing for someone who had spent years developing innovative, organic growing methods, and running successful farm operations. Green Valley operated from standardized procedures using pre-grown seedlings and chemical fertilizers. Sarah's workdays involved arranging displays of plants she hadn't grown, recommending chemical treatments she didn't believe in, and helping customers with basic gardening questions that barely touched her expertise. A mind-numbing routine that used none of her skills and offered no creative satisfaction. "You're wasting your talent," Alex told her repeatedly. "You could get hired as a farm manager at any decent organic operation in Oregon. Willamette Valley Organics or Sun River Farms would snatch you up in a heartbeat." But Sarah couldn't bear the thought of working for someone else in the industry where she had once been successful. Every job interview felt like admitting defeat, like accepting that she would never again have the independence and creativity that had made her love farming in the first place. The idea of working on someone else's farm, following someone else's growing plans, taking orders from managers who might not appreciate her experience, it all felt like confirmation that bankruptcy had destroyed not just her business, but her identity as an agricultural professional. Worse, working in the industry meant constant reminders of what she had lost. Former customers would recognize her, offering sympathetic smiles and awkward conversations about what happened to Mitchell. Family farms, seed suppliers who had once courted her business would greet her with the careful politeness reserved for people whose circumstances had dramatically changed. The emotional weight of these encounters was almost unbearable. Sarah had worked so hard to build respect and recognition in Oregon's competitive organic farming scene. Seeing that respect replaced by pity felt worse than anonymous failure. She had been a rising star, a female entrepreneur succeeding in a traditionally male-dominated industry. A pregnant woman showing other aspiring farmers what women could achieve through talent and determination. Now she was stocking potted petunias and avoiding eye contact with customers who might recognize her from her previous life. The idea of buying the failed radio station had come from a Craigslist listing that Alex had forwarded as a joke during one of their Sunday evening conversations about Sarah's future. "Look at this," Alex had laughed, showing Sarah the add-on. His phone, $350 for an entire radio station building. "There's got to be something seriously wrong with it. Maybe it's haunted or built over an old cemetery." The ad was brief and honest. Historic radio station building for sale. Ashland, OR. $350 cash only as is condition. Perfect for someone with more dreams than dollars. Serious inquiries only. Sarah had initially dismissed the idea as ridiculous. Commercial buildings didn't sell for less than the cost of a decent wheelbarrow, but something about the ad nagged at her for days. Perhaps the seller's brutal honesty about the property being suitable for someone with more dreams than dollars. That phrase resonated with Sarah in a way she hadn't expected. She was someone with more dreams than dollars, someone who's practical. Judgment had been compromised by the desire to believe that things could be different. The bankruptcy had stripped away her illusions about financial security and business success, but it hadn't eliminated her fundamental belief that, with enough determination and hard work, it might be possible to rebuild something meaningful. The drive to Ashland took nearly 3 hours from Oak Ridge, winding through southern Oregon's mountains and small towns. Sarah had called in sick to Green Valley Garden Center, the first day she had missed work in 5 months, and made the trip on a Wednesday morning when traffic was light and her anxiety was manageable. The address led her to a freestanding single-story building on Oak Street, about 6 blocks from the Ashland downtown area in what appeared to be a mixed residential and small business district. The radio station building was located on a corner lot with good visibility from both streets, nestled between a small coffee shop and a bookstore selling used books and local art. The building was clearly old, probably dating to the early 1960s. Based on the architectural details, but it had good bones. The classic broadcast studio facade with large windows was intact. The radio tower, though currently disconnected from any broadcasting equipment, still stood behind the building, and the location offered foot traffic from both locals and tourists visiting Ashland's famous Shakespeare Festival. Harold Yamamoto, the 78-year-old owner, met Sarah at the front door with a ring of tarnished brass keys and a weary expression that suggested he had shown the property to many dreamers who couldn't follow through on their ambitious plans. "I'll be honest with you right from the start," Mr. Yamamoto said as he unlocked the front door. 3 different people have tried to make a go of this place in the past 8 years. All of them were experienced in the radio business. All of them had more money than you probably do based on your phone call, and all of them gave up within 24 months. The candor was refreshing. After months of carefully diplomatic conversations about Sarah's transition period and new opportunities, Mr. Yamamoto was offering truth without pity, practical information without false encouragement. The interior was a mixture of obvious potential and significant problems. The main broadcast room featured classic radio details, a soundproof booth with vintage microphones, control panels along the walls, acoustic tiles that were faded but intact, and large picture windows that once allowed passers-by to watch live broadcasts happening inside. The technical equipment was outdated but partially functional, a mixing console that appeared to be from the early 1990s, a few microphones showing significant wear but still operational, CD players and tape decks that made alarming noises but completed their functions, and a transmission system that hummed loudly but showed no signs of actual broadcasting capability. But there were also obvious issues that would require attention and investment. The electrical system needed updating to handle modern equipment. Loads. The plumbing showed signs of minor leaks and old fixtures. But if you're seriously going to do this, you need to approach it systematically. Have you really thought about what kind of radio station you want to create? What would make you different from the 3 people who failed there before you? Sarah had been thinking about exactly that question since touring the broadcast booth and hearing Mr. Yamamoto's stories about previous tenants. Her experience with multiple successful farm operations had taught her techniques and business principles that most small-town operators never implemented. She understood financial planning, marketing management, and audience development. Most importantly, she had learned from Daniel's devastating mistakes about the absolute importance of conservative financial management and scrupulously honest accounting. "I want to focus on what I actually know best," Sarah explained, her voice gaining confidence as she articulated the vision that had been forming throughout the day. Agricultural education and sustainable living programming. Nothing so niche that it alienates regular listeners, but specialized enough that people will tune in specifically for what I'm broadcasting. The concept made sense given Ashland's demographics and the station's location. Local environmentally conscious residents would provide a reliable listener base, while tourists visiting the Shakespeare Festival might be attracted by authentic, locally inspired programming that offered better quality than generic stations without the pretension of higher-end productions. The previous tenants failed because they either aimed too broadly for the local market or couldn't generate enough advertising to cover their costs. Sarah continued, her strategic thinking becoming clearer as she spoke. "I think there's a middle ground. Really good quality programming at fair advertising rates with enough creativity to stand out without requiring massive production resources." Alex's response carried cautious optimism mixed with brotherly concern. "It sounds like you've thought this through more than I expected." "But Sarah, $350 is just the beginning. What about startup costs? Licensing, utilities, business permits, insurance. How long can you survive if it takes months to build an audience?" Sarah had been calculating exactly those numbers throughout her hotel room deliberations. Her $6,200 in savings would cover the building purchase, initial licensing fees, business setup, basic insurance, and approximately 3 months of minimal living expenses if she was extremely careful with spending. "I've run the numbers," she said, pulling out the notepad where she had itemized startup costs. "If I live in the apartment and keep overhead absolutely minimal, I can operate for 3 months on what I have saved. That should be enough time to determine whether this can work, or whether I need to admit defeat and find another job." The timeline was tight, but it was realistic given her resources and the low cost of the building. More importantly, the 3-month deadline would force her to focus on building audience and advertising revenue quickly, rather than getting distracted by expensive equipment, upgrades, or ambitious expansion plans. The next morning, Sarah returned to Ashland with $350 in cash, a cashier's check for the first month's utilities, and a determination to transform financial disaster into entrepreneurial opportunity. Mr. Yamamoto met her at the building with a notary public and all the necessary paperwork for immediate transfer of ownership. "I have a good feeling about you," Mr. Yamamoto said as he handed over the heavy ring of keys that would unlock Sarah's new life. "You have that look of someone who understands that real success takes time and patience, not quick schemes. The other people who tried this place were in a hurry to get rich or prove something. I think you just want to create good programming and build something sustainable." As the notary seal made the building transfer official, Sarah felt a mixture of terror and exhilaration that she hadn't experienced since her early days building the farming business with Daniel. She owned a building, owned a business opportunity, and owned the chance to prove that bankruptcy wasn't the end of her story, but rather the beginning of something completely different. Standing alone in her radio station after the paperwork was complete and Mr. Yamamoto had departed with warm wishes for success, Sarah looked around at the space that would determine whether her leap of faith represented brilliant courage or desperate foolishness. The broadcast console that would need to prove its reliability. The microphones where she would create programs that might restore her professional reputation. The studio where listeners would either embrace or reject her vision for what a community radio station could be. The ancient transmitter caught her attention again, its mechanical hum serving as a visible reminder that even buildings with good foundations could hide problems that destroyed the dreams of people who couldn't afford to fix them. But that transmitter also represented an opportunity. Once her business was established and generating reliable income, replacing it would be one of her first improvement projects. For the first time in 11 months, since that devastating May morning when bank representatives had locked the gates of her flagship farm, Sarah Mitchell felt like she was exactly where she needed to be, facing exactly the challenge she was meant to tackle. Tomorrow would bring the hard work of obtaining broadcasting licenses, establishing advertising relationships, and turning an empty building into a thriving radio station. But tonight belonged to possibility and the satisfaction of having chosen hope over fear. The bankrupt pregnant farmer who had lost everything to her husband's cryptocurrency addiction was gone, replaced by the owner of Harvest Radio, ready to discover whether $350 could buy a second chance at independence, creativity, and the American dream. As Sarah climbed the narrow stairs to her new apartment, carrying the few possessions she had brought for her overnight stay, she felt a profound sense of purpose that had been missing since the bankruptcy destroyed her previous life. The building she had purchased for less than the cost of a used lawnmower was about to become the foundation for rebuilding not just her career, but her identity as someone who created meaningful content that brought knowledge and joy to other people's lives. She couldn't have imagined as she fell asleep that first night in the small apartment above her radio station that the ancient transmitter she planned to replace was hiding technology that would transform her simple business venture into one of the most significant scientific discoveries in Oregon since the space age. The building she had bought as a desperate attempt to rebuild her life was about to reveal secrets that had been waiting over 25 years for someone with the courage to look beneath the surface and the determination to preserve what others might have discarded. The following morning, Sarah woke before dawn in her new apartment, immediately aware of the profound change in her circumstances. For the first time in nearly a year, she was waking up in a space that belonged entirely to her, with work ahead that would directly benefit her own future rather than someone else's business. The sensation was both liberating and terrifying. Her first order of business was assessing the broadcasting equipment more thoroughly than the brief tour with Mr. Yamamoto had allowed. The mixing console appeared to be from the mid-1990s old, enough to lack modern digital interfaces, but young enough to function reliably if properly maintained. The microphone showed significant wear, but produced clear sound during testing. The CD players and tape decks completed their test cycles without jamming, though the audio quality was not ideal. Most concerning was the transmitter, which powered on but showed significant oxidation and made mechanical noises that suggested it would need professional attention sooner rather than later. Most importantly, all the equipment was clean and appeared to have been properly maintained by William Thompson before his station failed. The previous tenant had clearly taken pride in his operation, leaving behind detailed equipment manuals, maintenance logs, and even handwritten notes about the quirks and optimal settings for each piece of broadcasting gear. Sarah spent her first week obtaining the necessary broadcasting licenses, establishing accounts with potential advertisers, and deep cleaning every surface in preparation for actual broadcasting. The process was tedious but familiar from her business experience, and she felt genuine satisfaction in preparing her own radio station according to her own standards. The FCC licensing process was more complicated than she had anticipated, but her thorough research and careful application resulted in approval for a low-power FM license that would allow her to broadcast within a 3-5-mile radius of Ashland, enough to cover the town and immediate surroundings. Her business license application was approved without complications, and her basic liability insurance policy went into effect immediately. By the end of her second week, Sarah was ready to begin actual broadcasting. She started conservatively, focusing on agricultural education programs and sustainable living content that would allow her to test her equipment, refine her processes, and begin building relationships with potential listeners. The Harvest Hour featured practical gardening advice, interviews with local farmers, and discussions about sustainable food systems, content that showcased her agricultural expertise and careful research without requiring expensive production or complicated technical setups. Her first listeners were downtown workers who tuned in during their morning commutes, attracted by the grand opening announcements she had placed in local coffee shops and the genuine passion that filled her voice as she shared farming wisdom that had taken years to develop. The positive response was immediate and encouraging. "Your segment on companion planting completely changed how I'm approaching my garden this year," one regular listener told her during her third week of operation. "How did you learn so much about this?" Her knowledge wasn't revolutionary, but it was shared with care and practical experience that listeners immediately recognized and appreciated. Word spread through Ashland's environmentally conscious community, and by her fourth week, Sarah was reaching 300 to 400 listeners daily. Downtown workers, local business owners, and families who had heard recommendations from friends began establishing Harvest Radio as part of their regular routines. The tourist traffic started picking up in her sixth week. As summer brought more visitors to Ashland for the Shakespeare Festival, travelers seeking local flavor began finding their way to the station's frequency, attracted by authentic programming that reflected the region's values of sustainability and connection to the land. These higher engagement listeners provided the audience growth that allowed Sarah to attract more advertising and gradually expand her daily offerings. But it was during her seventh week of operation, while attempting to repair and upgrade the ancient transmitter that had bothered her since her first tour of the building, that Sarah Mitchell would make the discovery that would transform her simple RADIO venture into something she could never have imagined. The oxidation inside the massive transmitter unit had been growing increasingly problematic, causing signal degradation and making the equipment run almost constantly at high temperatures. Sarah had finally saved enough money to hire a local broadcast technician to evaluate whether repair was possible or replacement was inevitable. What they found inside that vintage transmitter would change not only Sarah's life, but potentially the understanding of extraterrestrial communication and humanity's place in the cosmos. The building she had purchased for $350 was about to reveal that some secrets are worth far more than the cost of the real estate that protects them. 3 months after purchasing Harvest Radio, Sarah Mitchell stood in her broadcast booth at 5 a.m., reviewing program notes for the morning show, and her back aching from hours of preparation, questioning whether courage and determination were sufficient to overcome the brutal mathematics of small business survival. The romantic notion of owning her own radio station had collided with the harsh reality of 16-hour workdays, razor-thin profit margins, and the constant anxiety that one equipment failure or slow week could destroy everything she had worked to rebuild. The brown envelope from Jackson County Tax Assessment Office lay unopened on her console, but Sarah already knew what it contained: property tax bills that would consume nearly 2 weeks of advertising revenue, due in 45 days whether her business was thriving or struggling. The quarterly business license renewal was due in 3 weeks. Utilities were running higher than projected as summer approached, and the ancient air conditioning system struggled to maintain temperatures that wouldn't damage sensitive equipment. Her broadcasting insurance premium would require renewal in August. Most concerning was the transmitter, which had been making increasingly alarming mechanical noises and struggling to maintain proper signal strength despite the recent cleaning and minor repairs. The estimate from Pacific Northwest Broadcasting Services had been devastating: $2,800 for a complete system overhaul or $9,600 for a newer used unit that would provide reliability for at least 5 years. Either option represented more money than Sarah had available, and the transmitter's failure would mean losing all her broadcasting capability while being unable to serve the advertisers who were just beginning to trust her station's reach. It was exactly the kind of equipment crisis that had contributed to William Thompson's eventual failure. Sarah understood with crystal clarity how quickly a single expensive repair could transform modest success into business catastrophe. The irony wasn't lost on her that Harvest Radio was actually succeeding in ways that the previous 3 attempts had not. Her listener base had grown steadily to nearly 700 regular listeners, with weekend volumes sometimes reaching 1,100 unique tuners. Word-of-mouth recommendations were bringing new listeners from across southern Oregon who specifically sought out her agricultural expertise and authentic approach to broadcasting. Yesterday's advertising sales had totaled $780, her highest single-day revenue since opening. Her farm-to-table interview series had attracted several local restaurants as sponsors, and she had taken bookings for 3 graduation celebration announcements that would generate over $900 in revenue. Local media bloggers had begun featuring Harvest Radio in their recommendations, and the Ashland Chamber of Commerce had invited her to participate in their upcoming summer festival as the official broadcaster. But success without sufficient capital reserves meant operating on a financial knife's edge where any unexpected expense could prove catastrophic. Sarah's savings account contained $1,620, enough to cover exactly 3 weeks of operating expenses if revenue disappeared entirely, but insufficient to address major equipment repairs or seasonal fluctuations that could reduce income during slower winter months. The stress was taking a physical toll that Sarah tried to hide from her listeners, who depended on her energetic and cheerful on-air persona. She was struggling with pregnancy discomfort despite being surrounded by supportive messages all day. surviving on 5 hours of sleep nightly, and developing the chronic back pain that seemed to plague everyone who spent long hours, leaning over broadcast equipment and production tables. More troubling was the growing realization that even modest success might not be sustainable at her current scale of operation. To generate sufficient income to both cover living expenses and build necessary capital reserves, Sarah would need to either dramatically increase audience size or raise advertising rates to levels that might alienate the small local businesses who formed the core of her client base. The phone call that would change everything came at 7:15 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in July while Sarah was preparing to interview a local beekeeper for her morning agricultural segment. "Sarah, I'm sorry to call so early." Alex's voice carried an urgency that immediately captured Sarah's attention. "I just got off a 24-hour fire watch shift, and I've been thinking about your situation all night. We need to talk seriously about your finances." Alex had visited the radio station the previous weekend and observed firsthand the exhausting pace that Sarah was maintaining while trying to balance quality programming, audience growth, and financial survival. As a forest ranger with emergency management experience, Alex had developed expertise in recognizing when people were pushing themselves beyond sustainable limits. "I can see how hard you're working, and I'm incredibly proud of what you've built," Alex continued. "But I'm also terrified that you're going to work yourself into pregnancy complications while trying to save a business that might not be financially viable at this scale." The conversation that followed forced Sarah to confront reality she had been avoiding through sheer determination and 16-hour workdays. Alex had researched small business failure rates and discovered that most broadcasting operations required 18 to 24 months to achieve sustainable profitability, even with adequate initial capitalization. "You're trying to bootstrap a business with virtually no capital reserves," Alex explained with the brutal honesty that their relationship had always demanded. "That means any equipment failure, seasonal slowdown, or unexpected expense could force you to close regardless of how good your programming is or how hard you're willing to work." Alex had also researched the specific history of the building Sarah had purchased, discovering public records that revealed why previous tenants had failed. Despite producing quality content and building loyal audiences, the combination of old infrastructure, seasonal variations in tourism, and Ashland's limited market for local radio created challenges that required substantial financial cushions to survive. "William Thompson wasn't incompetent," Alex continued. "He was an excellent broadcaster with dedicated listeners, but he couldn't survive an equipment failure during a slow season because he didn't have adequate reserves. You're following exactly the same pattern, just with different programming." The harsh assessment stung because it was accurate. Sarah had been so focused on proving that she could rebuild her life through determination and skill that she had ignored the mathematical realities of undercapitalized small business operations. Her success was real, but it was also fragile, in ways that no amount of hard work could completely overcome. "What are you suggesting?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew Alex's recommendation. "I think you should seriously consider selling the building while you still have positive equity and using the proceeds to either recapitalize the business properly or find a different opportunity that doesn't require as much physical and financial risk." Alex had researched property values in downtown Ashland and discovered that Sarah's building, despite its problems, was worth significantly more than the $350 she had paid. The location near the theater district, the classic radio station architecture, and the gradual revitalization of the area as a tourist destination had increased property values considerably over the past few years. "A local realtor told me that buildings like yours are selling for $45,000 to $65,000 depending on condition," Alex explained. "That would give you enough capital to either invest properly in the radio business or pursue other opportunities without the constant stress of operating on financial margins that allow no room for error. The suggestion made practical sense, but it also felt like admitting defeat, just as Sarah was beginning to prove that her skills and determination could create something valuable. Selling the building would eliminate the immediate financial pressure, but it would also mean abandoning the independence and creative fulfillment that had made the past 3 months the most satisfying work of her professional life since the bankruptcy. More importantly, selling would mean acknowledging that Alex was right about the mathematical impossibility of bootstrapping a successful business with inadequate capital. Sarah would be trading the possibility of long-term success for short-term financial security, essentially accepting that her circumstances limited her to safer, more conventional paths. That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment above the radio station, surrounded by financial records and business projections that confirmed Alex's concerns about sustainability. Her revenue was growing steadily, but her expenses were also increasing as equipment aged and seasonal utility costs rose. The gap between income and security remained constant, leaving her vulnerable to any unexpected crisis. The ancient transmitter in her broadcast room seemed to mock her deliberations, its laboring components serving as a visible reminder of problems that would eventually require attention regardless of her financial circumstances. The repair estimate from Pacific Northwest Broadcasting Services had been $2,800 manageable if her business maintained current revenue levels, but potentially devastating if combined with other unexpected expenses. As Sarah reviewed her options, she realized that her decision would ultimately define not just her immediate future, but her fundamental approach to risk, security, and the pursuit of goals that required accepting uncertainty in exchange for the possibility of achieving something meaningful. The safe choice was obvious: sell the building, take the profit, and use the capital to either invest properly in a broadcasting business or pursue opportunities that offered more predictable financial outcomes. Alex's analysis was mathematically sound. Sarah's current trajectory involved risks that extended beyond mere business failure to potential physical and emotional exhaustion that could affect her pregnancy. But the safe choice also meant abandoning the vision that had sustained her through the darkest period of her life. For 3 months, Sarah had experienced the satisfaction of creating programming that brought genuine knowledge and joy to her listeners, the pride of building something entirely through her own efforts, and the daily proof that her professional skills retained their value despite the bankruptcy that had nearly destroyed her confidence. More fundamentally, selling would mean accepting that financial security was more important than the possibility of achieving independence and creative fulfillment. It would be a practical decision that prioritized avoiding failure over pursuing success, reducing risk at the cost of eliminating the possibility of building something truly her own. As Sarah deliberated, looking down at her growing belly, she couldn't help but wonder what kind of example she wanted to set for her child. Would she be the mother who played it safe and accepted limited options? Or would she be the one who showed that sometimes the greatest risks led to the most meaningful rewards? She picked up a small ultrasound photo from her last doctor's appointment, her daughter's profile, clearly visible in grainy black and white. "What would you do?" she whispered to the image. "Take the safe path or believe that something extraordinary might be waiting if we just keep going?" The decision crystallized as she watched the lights of cars moving through downtown Ashland through her apartment window. She would continue operating the radio station, but with modifications that addressed Alex's legitimate concerns about sustainability and capital reserves. Instead of selling the building, Sarah would implement a more aggressive approach to revenue growth while maintaining strict cost controls that would allow her to build financial reserves more quickly. She would expand her sponsored content opportunities, which offered higher profit margins than traditional advertising. She would establish partnerships with local businesses for co-branded content that could provide steadier income streams. Most importantly, She would set specific financial benchmarks that would determine whether the business was truly viable or whether she needed to reconsider her strategy. The commitment represented a middle path between reckless optimism and premature surrender. Sarah would give herself 6 more months to prove that Harvest Radio could become financially sustainable, but with clear metrics that would prevent emotional attachment from overriding practical judgment. Her first step was addressing the immediate equipment crisis that threatened to derail her progress. Rather than spending $2,800 on comprehensive repairs, Sarah decided to investigate alternative broadcasting solutions that might provide short-term relief while she saved for a permanent replacement. The ancient transmitter was energy inefficient and unreliable, but it still maintained signal most of the time. If she could extend its useful life by even a few months, she might accumulate enough capital for a proper replacement. The next morning, Sarah called Rachel Blackwood, a local broadcast engineer who had given her the initial repair estimate. "I can't afford the full repair right now," she explained honestly, "but I'm wondering if there's any way to keep this thing running for another 3 to 4 months while I save up for a proper replacement." Rachel had worked on vintage broadcasting equipment throughout Southern Oregon for over 15 years. "Let me come take another look," she offered. Sometimes these old units have simple problems that get overlooked because everyone assumes they're just worn out. No promises, but it's worth checking before you spend thousands you don't have. That afternoon, Rachel arrived with her tools and a level of curiosity about vintage equipment that went beyond mere professional interest. "They don't make transmitters like this anymore," she commented, examining the massive unit with obvious appreciation. "This is a Stellartronics Model 67 from around 1968, built like a fortress. The vacuum tubes in these old units can actually last 40 to 50 years if they're properly maintained." As Rachel began disassembling the access panels to examine the electronic components, Sarah explained her financial situation with candid honesty. "I need this transmitter to last until I can afford a replacement, even if it's not perfect. I just need it functional enough to maintain broadcasting for a few more months." Rachel nodded understanding as she worked. "Small business is brutal. My mom owned a computer repair shop when I was growing up, and I remember plenty of nights when our dinner conversation revolved around whether we could make payroll that week." Rachel's methodical examination of the transmitter revealed several issues that contributed to its inefficiency: oxidized connections, misaligned vacuum tubes, and accumulated dust in the cooling system. "These are all fixable without replacing the major components," Rachel explained. "Won't make it new, but might keep it running for another 6 to 12 months if we're lucky." The estimated repair cost was $520, still significant for Sarah's tight budget, but far more manageable than the full system overhaul. More importantly, it provided a realistic bridge solution that would allow her to build capital reserves while continuing operations. "Let's do it," Sarah decided. "If it buys me even 6 months, that's enough time to save for a proper replacement." As Rachel began the repair work, she asked Sarah to help clear space around the back of the transmitter, moving years of accumulated dust in equipment parts that previous tenants had placed behind and beneath the massive unit. "We need better airflow around the heat sinks," she explained. "These old units need to breathe." Sarah began removing old manuals, ancient cables, and miscellaneous broadcasting parts that had been stored in the cramped space behind the transmitter. As she cleared the area, she noticed something unusual, what appeared to be a modified panel on the back wall of the transmitter, slightly different in color and texture from the surrounding metal. "Rachel, what's this?" she asked, pointing to the panel. "It looks like someone installed an access point that wasn't part of the original design." Rachel examined the panel with professional curiosity. "That's definitely not factory standard. Someone modified this unit at some point, maybe for easier access to the power amplifier. Let me take a closer look." As Rachel removed the screws securing the panel, both she and Sarah expected to find additional broadcasting components, or perhaps an improvised repair from a previous owner. What they discovered instead was a carefully constructed hidden compartment that had been intentionally built into the transmitter's internal framework. A space approximately 18 inches wide, 12 inches tall, and 6 inches deep, large enough to contain substantial objects while remaining completely hidden from casual inspection. The compartment contained what appeared to be a metallic device roughly the size of a hardback book constructed from materials neither woman recognized. It featured unusual geometric patterns etched into its surface, no visible screws or fasteners, and what looked like crystalline components embedded within a metallic framework. The device was secured within a custom-fitted housing that protected it from heat and vibration while keeping it completely hidden from view. "What the hell?" Rachel muttered, carefully extracting the device from its hiding place. This definitely wasn't in the Stellartronics service manual. Sarah stared at the device in astonishment. Who would hide something like this inside? A transmitter. And what is it? Rachel examined the construction of the hidden compartment with professional appreciation. Based on the materials and techniques, this modification was done sometime in the late 1990s. Someone went to considerable trouble to create this hiding place. This is skilled electronics work that would have required professional tools and expertise. The discovery presented Sarah with an immediate decision. Should she attempt to understand what the device was, potentially damaging something that clearly someone had gone to great lengths to conceal, or seek professional assistance first? The unusual materials and construction suggested technology well beyond standard broadcasting equipment. "I've got a friend who works with experimental communication systems at Southern Oregon University," Rachel offered. "She might be able to tell us what this is without damaging it." "Want me to give her a call?" Sarah nodded, her mind racing with questions about what the device might be and why someone had gone to such elaborate lengths to conceal it within an ordinary radio transmitter. "Yes, please. I'd rather not mess with it if there's a chance we can identify it properly." Rachel's friend, Dr. Elaine Kaminsky, arrived 2 hours later. An associate professor of electrical engineering with a background in advanced communication systems, Dr. Kaminsky examined the device with professional curiosity. "This is unlike any commercial technology I've ever seen," she explained. "The materials appear to be a titanium ceramic composite, not commonly used in consumer or even military-grade electronics. And these crystalline components." She pointed to several translucent structures embedded within the framework. "They resemble synthetic quartz oscillators, but with atomic structures I'm not familiar with." The implications were startling. A device constructed from advanced materials, hidden inside a vintage radio transmitter in a small town station, suggested scenarios far beyond ordinary broadcasting concerns. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "Can you determine what it does without damaging it?" she asked. Dr. Kaminsky nodded thoughtfully. "I believe it's some kind of signal processing device or advanced receiver. The configuration suggests it was designed to intercept, decode, or possibly enhance specific frequency ranges. I can run some basic tests without powering it up, but I'll need about an hour with my diagnostic equipment." As Dr. Kaminsky worked on analyzing the device, Sarah and Rachel continued the transmitter repairs, both distracted by speculation about what the mysterious technology might represent. The station had closed for the day, allowing them to work without interruptions from visitors, but Sarah couldn't help glancing repeatedly at Dr. Kaminsky's progress. Finally, Dr. Kaminsky called them over. "This is extraordinary," she said, her voice carrying the controlled excitement of a scientist making an unexpected discovery. "Based on my preliminary analysis, this appears to be a highly sophisticated signal processing array designed to detect and decode extremely weak radio Signals from a very specific frequency band, one not typically used for terrestrial communications. Sarah looked at the device with growing bewilderment. What does that mean in plain English? It means, Dr. Kaminsky said carefully, that someone modified this transmitter to simultaneously broadcast your normal radio programming while also monitoring for and recording signals from a frequency range most commonly associated with deep space communications, the kind typically only received by large radio telescope arrays. Deep space? Sarah repeated. Like NASA communications with satellites? No, Dr. Kaminsky clarified. Much further. This frequency band would be looking for signals from well beyond our solar system. The sensitivity of these components suggests it was designed to capture extremely faint signals that would normally require much larger equipment to detect. The implications were staggering. The device appeared to be monitoring for potential communications from deep space, while disguised as an ordinary component in a small-town radio transmitter, the kind of technology that would normally be associated with major research institutions or government projects, not hidden in a failing radio station in Southern Oregon. If this is genuine, Dr. Kaminsky continued, it represents extremely advanced technology, potentially decades ahead of what's commercially available. The question is, why would someone hide something this sophisticated in such an obscure location? And has it actually recorded anything? As Dr. Kaminsky examined the device more closely, she discovered what appeared to be a data storage component, a crystalline matrix that could potentially contain recorded signals. This might hold whatever the device has detected, she explained. But accessing it would require specialized equipment I don't have here. Rachel and Dr. Kaminsky stared at the device with expressions of growing amazement. Sarah, Rachel said carefully, if this is what Dr. Kaminsky thinks it is, we might be looking at classified technology. Having this in your possession could potentially raise questions about how it got here and who put it in your transmitter. Dr. Kaminsky nodded agreement. Technology this advanced would typically be restricted to major research institutions or government agencies. There's a possibility it represents proprietary or even classified research that was never meant to be in private hands. Sarah felt the weight of the discovery settling on her shoulders. What had begun as a simple transmitter repair had unexpectedly thrust her into a situation with potential scientific, legal, and even astronomical dimensions far beyond her experience or expertise. I need to find someone who can tell me if this is what we think it is, she decided. Someone who understands the technology and can advise me on the proper way to handle it. Rachel suggested contacting Dr. James Chun, an astronomy professor at Southern Oregon University who specialized in SETI, researched the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, and had previously worked with radio telescope arrays. He might be able to give you some preliminary guidance without immediately involving authorities, Rachel advised. At least he could tell you if this appears to be genuine advanced technology or just an elaborate hoax. As Rachel and Dr. Kaminsky departed, promising complete confidentiality about the discovery, Sarah carefully secured the device in her apartment. The transmitter repairs had been completed successfully, providing the temporary solution she needed for her immediate business concerns. But the device hidden inside it had created an entirely new set of questions and potential complications that transcended her struggles to keep her small business afloat. That evening, as Sarah sat alone in her apartment, she carefully examined the device, trying to understand the potential significance of what she had discovered. The object appeared to be monitoring for signals and frequency ranges associated with potential extraterrestrial communications, the kind of project normally undertaken by major universities or government agencies with multi-million-dollar budgets and massive radio telescope arrays. If authentic, this small device represented technology that could potentially detect signals from beyond our solar system using equipment a fraction of the size normally required for such sensitive work. The discovery that had begun as an unexpected surprise was revealing itself as a test of Sarah's judgment about matters far more significant than radio station management. The transmitter that had seemed like her most pressing problem that morning was now the source of a device that could potentially have profound scientific significance if it was authentic. Sarah's email to Dr. James Chun was carefully worded, describing her discovery as unusual technology potentially related to deep space communications without mentioning specific details or suggesting extraterrestrial connections. She had spent nearly an hour composing the message, trying to provide enough information to establish the potential scientific significance without sounding like an overexcited conspiracy theorist or someone seeking attention. Dr. Chun's response arrived at 7:15 the next morning, just as Sarah was preparing for her morning broadcast. "Miss Mitchell, your email has generated considerable interest. Devices designed for detecting weak signals from deep space frequency bands are particularly significant to researchers studying potential non-terrestrial communications. If what you've discovered is authentic, it could provide valuable insights into advanced signal processing technology. I would be very interested in examining this device. Are you available to meet tomorrow afternoon?" Given the potential scientific importance, professional assessment would be advisable. The professor's enthusiasm was both encouraging and concerning. Encouraging because it suggested her discovery might indeed be scientifically significant, but concerning because it confirmed that her quiet period of private research and decision-making was about to end. Sarah called Dr. Chun's office number and reached him directly. "Miss Mitchell, thank you for contacting me about your discovery," Dr. Chun began without preamble. "I should mention that claims about advanced technology or extraterrestrial signals are not uncommon in this region because of our dark skies and proximity to several government facilities, but most turn out to be misidentified conventional equipment or elaborate hoaxes. However, what you've described suggests something potentially more significant." "I understand your caution," Sarah replied, watching through her studio windows as early morning listeners began parking outside to drop off homegrown produce for her weekly community garden exchange program. "I have no background in astronomy or communications technology, so I'm seeking expert guidance before making any decisions about this device." "That's refreshing," Dr. Chun said, his tone warming slightly. "Too often people with unusual discoveries have unrealistic expectations about both authenticity and significance. Your approach suggests you understand the scientific process required for proper evaluation." Dr. Chun explained that preliminary authentication would require examining the device's physical characteristics, materials analysis, and comparison with known communications technology. The process could be conducted confidentially with no obligation to publish findings or involve other institutions until Sarah decided how to proceed. "The key question," Dr. Chun continued, "is whether you're prepared for the potential consequences of authentication. If this device proves to be genuine advanced technology, particularly anything related to potential non-terrestrial communications, it will inevitably attract significant attention from researchers, institutions, and potentially government agencies." Sarah had been researching exactly those potential consequences since discovering the device. "Dr. Chun, I need to understand the implications before proceeding. This device was discovered on my private property during routine maintenance, but I want to ensure that pursuing authentication doesn't compromise my ability to make informed decisions about its future." "I appreciate your thoughtfulness," Dr. Chun replied. "Let me be clear about both the process and your rights. As the property owner who discovered this device on your own land, you retain certain basic rights to the physical object. However, if it contains truly advanced technology with potential national security implications, the situation becomes more complex regardless of how it came into your possession." He explained that preliminary authentication could be conducted at Sarah's radio station, allowing examination of the device without removing it from her control. This approach would provide the information needed to make informed decisions while minimizing exposure to broader institutional involvement. My recommendation would be a discrete preliminary assessment to establish basic technological authenticity. Dr. Chun continued. This would give you understanding of what you actually possess before determining whether to pursue more extensive analysis or institutional collaboration. The approach seemed both professional and respectful of Sarah's position, offering the expertise she needed without immediate commitment to broader academic or government involvement. Sarah decided that preliminary authentication was worth the risk of eventual institutional attention. "I'd like to arrange a meeting," Sarah said finally, "but I'd prefer to conduct the initial examination here at my station rather than transporting the device to your campus." "Absolutely," Dr. Chun replied immediately. "Field examination is often preferable for unusual technologies, particularly when they've been discovered in unexpected contexts. I can arrange to visit tomorrow afternoon, if you're available." They confirmed arrangements for Dr. Chun to visit the station the following day. After ending the call, Sarah felt both anticipation and anxiety about crossing the threshold from private discovery to professional evaluation. She spent the morning researching Dr. Chun's academic background and publications, wanting to understand his expertise and approach before entrusting him with potentially sensitive technology. Dr. Chun's credentials were impressive. Ph.D. in astrophysics from Caltech, author of 2 books on radio astronomy and numerous published papers on SETI research and signal processing algorithms. One of his recent articles titled, "Beyond Traditional SETI, Alternative Detection Methodologies for Non-Terrestrial Intelligence," seemed directly relevant to Sarah's situation. The article argued that traditional SETI approaches using massive radio telescope arrays might be overlooking alternative signal types or communication methods that could be detected with different technological approaches, and that breakthrough discoveries might come from unexpected sources or methodologies rather than conventional research institutions. Reading Dr. Chun's research, Sarah realized that her device might not just be an interesting artifact, but potential evidence for scientific theories that researchers have been pursuing for decades. If authentic, the technology could provide direct insight into advanced signal processing capabilities that had remained theoretical until now. Dr. Chun arrived at Harvest Radio precisely on time, the following afternoon after Sarah had closed for the day. He appeared to be in his early 50s with salt and pepper hair and rectangular glasses, carrying a hard-sided equipment case containing what looked like specialized tools for technical analysis. "Miss Mitchell," he extended his hand with a firm handshake. "Thank you for allowing me to examine this device. I must admit your discovery has generated considerable anticipation. Authentic advanced signal processing technology from this frequency range could fill significant gaps in our understanding of how to detect extremely faint radio emissions from distant sources." Sarah led him to a private area she had prepared in the apartment upstairs, away from any potential interruptions or curious observers. Dr. Chun immediately began unpacking specialized equipment, high-resolution scanning devices, spectroscopic analyzers, and what appeared to be custom-built testing apparatus designed for evaluating electronic components. "Before we begin," Dr. Chun said, donning latex gloves, "I want to emphasize that this examination is confidential academic consultation. I won't discuss this device with anyone without your explicit permission, and you retain complete control over any decisions about further examination or institutional involvement." Sarah carefully retrieved the device from her secure storage, feeling the weight of potential scientific discovery as she placed it on the examination table. Dr. Chun's eyes widened slightly as he examined the object itself, running gloved fingers over the unusual materials and geometric patterns. "This is consistent with theoretical designs for quantum-based signal processing arrays," he murmured, speaking partly to himself as he worked. "The materials, configuration, and apparent lack of conventional power sources align with proposed advanced communications technology. With meticulous care, Dr. Chun began examining the device itself, starting with non-invasive scans to analyze its internal structure without disassembling it. He studied the materials under various types of spectroscopic analysis, examined the crystalline components with magnification, and checked power signatures against reference readings from his equipment. The materials show extremely unusual molecular arrangements, he explained while examining one component under magnification. The crystalline structures have been artificially grown in configurations that would be exceptionally difficult to produce with current manufacturing techniques. Sarah watched the authentication process with growing excitement and apprehension. Each positive indicator from Dr. Chun increased both the potential significance of her discovery and the complexity of decisions she would soon face about how to proceed. The technology is particularly remarkable, Dr. Chun continued, while carefully analyzing power signatures with evident expertise. This appears to be a quantum coherent receiver designed to detect and decode signals across multiple frequency bands simultaneously. If authentic, it represents capabilities at least 25 to 30 years beyond current commercial technology. He pointed to specific structures within the device that seemed to function as reception and processing components. This array appears designed to capture what we call spread spectrum, transmission signals deliberately dispersed across multiple frequencies to make them virtually undetectable to conventional receivers. It's a technique we've theorized might be used for interstellar communications to overcome signal degradation across vast distances. The analysis confirmed what Sarah had begun to understand through her own research. The device contained advanced technology related to detecting potentially non-terrestrial communications that could significantly advance understanding of how to search for signals from beyond our solar system. Dr. Chun, Sarah asked carefully, assuming this device is authentic, what would be its potential significance for scientific research in your field? He looked up from the scanning device, his eyes bright with scholarly excitement. Ms. Mitchell, if this technology is genuine and preliminary indicators strongly suggest it is, it could fundamentally change our approach to searching for potential non-terrestrial signals. Current SETI efforts rely on massive fixed installations and enormous computing power. This device suggests a completely different approach might be viable using much smaller distributed receiver networks. Dr. Chin explained that existing scientific methods provided limited capability for detecting the kinds of weak, spread spectrum signals this device appeared designed to capture. Current technology required massive radio telescope arrays and supercomputer processing, making the search extremely expensive and limited to a few major research institutions. This device appears to provide direct access to signal detection, capability that has remained theoretical for over 2 decades, he continued. It shows innovative quantum processing techniques and material science applications that could revolutionize not just SETI research but potentially all forms of wireless communication. The authentication session continued for nearly 4 hours, with Dr. Chun conducting increasingly sophisticated preliminary tests on the device's components and operational capabilities. Each examination reinforced his initial assessment that the materials and design were consistent with highly advanced communications technology far beyond current commercial standards. The quantum processor analysis will require more extensive testing with specialized equipment, Dr. Chun explained as he concluded his preliminary examination. But the material composition, signal processing architecture, and power system design are all consistent with theoretical models for advanced communications technology at least 25 years ahead of current public capabilities. Finally, Dr. Chun sat back and looked directly at Sarah with an expression of barely contained amazement. Ms. Mitchell, based on preliminary examination, I believe you have discovered what may be the most significant advance in communications technology found in the past 20 years. The words hung in the air between them, marking the moment when Sarah's private speculation became expert validation. Her discovery was not just authentic. It was potentially groundbreaking for scientific research on advanced communications and the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. What happens now? Sarah asked, feeling the weight of decisions that would affect not just her immediate situation, but potentially scientific understanding and research for decades to come. That depends entirely on your goals and timeline, Dr. Chun replied thoughtfully. From a purely scientific perspective, this technology deserves comprehensive study and eventual publication to advance knowledge. From a practical standpoint, authentic technology of this significance has substantial implications that extend beyond academic interest. He explained that full authentication would require more extensive testing and analysis, including comparative studies with known advanced communication systems and consultation with additional experts in quantum physics, materials science, and signal processing. But even preliminary examination provided sufficient evidence to confirm extraordinary scientific significance. The question, Dr. Chun continued, is whether you're interested in academic collaboration that could maximize scientific understanding, private consideration of options that could address immediate concerns, or some combination that serves multiple purposes. Sarah felt the complexity of the decision weighing on her. The authentication confirmed that her discovery could indeed provide transformation that would permanently alter her circumstances, but it also revealed scientific significance that transcended mere personal benefit. This device represented technology that could fundamentally change humanity's search for intelligent life beyond Earth. Decisions about its future would affect not just her family situation, but potentially scientific knowledge itself. Dr. Chun, I appreciate your expertise and discretion, Sarah said finally. I need some time to consider the implications of what you've confirmed, but I also have practical concerns about maintaining my business operations while making decisions. About this device, I understand completely, he replied. Scientific discoveries often create tension between immediate practical needs and longer-term knowledge value. What I can offer is continued consultation as you consider your options. And if you decide to pursue academic collaboration, I can facilitate connections with institutions that might provide both scientific resources and appropriate support. Dr. Chun packed his equipment and prepared to leave. He handed Sarah a business card with multiple contact numbers. Ms. Mitchell, regardless of what you decide about this device, please know that its discovery represents an extraordinary contribution to scientific knowledge. I hope we can work together to ensure it receives the attention it deserves while serving your legitimate interests. After he departed, Sarah sat alone at her kitchen table where the device lay carefully placed on a cushioned surface, its significance now validated by expert examination. The authentication had answered some questions while raising others that were potentially more complex. She now knew with confidence that her discovery was scientifically significant and potentially valuable. But she also understood that pursuing either academic collaboration or any form of disclosure would inevitably attract broader attention to both the device and its discovery location. Word would spread through professional networks potentially, reaching institutions or individuals with interests that might not align with her needs. Some might question whether technology of this nature should remain in private hands, regardless of how it was discovered. Most immediately, Sarah realized she needed to secure the device more carefully than her apartment provided. Materials confirmed to be this technologically advanced required professional preservation and security measures that her current setup couldn't provide. That evening, Sarah called Alex, deciding that family should be informed about the discoveries. Confirmed significance before she made decisions about next steps. Alex, I need to tell you about something I discovered during the transmitter repairs. She began carefully, something that changes our situation significantly. Sarah, please tell me you're not calling about some crazy scheme that's going to jeopardize the radio station just when it's finally becoming stable. Alex replied with the exasperated tone of someone who had worried about his sister's impulsive decisions throughout the recovery from bankruptcy. Actually, it's exactly the opposite, Sarah said. I've discovered something in the building that could potentially solve our financial concerns permanently while preserving scientifically significant technology that deserves proper attention. She explained her discovery and Dr. Chin's authentication in terms that emphasized both scientific importance and potential implications. Alex listened with growing amazement as Sarah described advanced communications technology that could fundamentally change the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. You're telling me that alien hunting technology was hidden inside your transmitter, and you just happened to find it during routine repairs? Alex asked, his forest ranger training immediately focusing on practical implications. Not exactly. Alien hunting in the Hollywood sense, Sarah clarified. More like advanced signal detection technology that could theoretically receive communications from extremely distant sources. The difference matters because this device could have both scientific value and significant implications for understanding our place in the cosmos. Alex was quiet for a moment before responding. Sarah, if this technology is as significant as this professor suggests, you need proper legal consultation before making any decisions about authentication, disclosure, or academic collaboration. Scientific discoveries of this nature involve complex legal and ethical questions that could affect both immediate decisions and long-term interests. His perspective provided sobering reminder that validating the discoveries' significance was only the first step in a process that would require careful navigation of academic, legal, and practical considerations. But for the first time since inheriting devastating debt from Daniel's cryptocurrency addiction, Sarah felt that she was dealing with opportunities rather than just problems. The device on her kitchen table represented more than potential financial transformation. They likely placed the device in an operating radio transmitter, both to disguise its power requirements and to utilize the existing broadcast infrastructure while they gathered sufficient data, Dr. Chun continued. Something must have happened to the research team before they could complete their work and reveal their findings. Further investigation revealed records of a private research foundation called Starbridge Technologies that had operated in Southern Oregon from 1994 to 1999 before abruptly dissolving following the death of its founder, Dr. Eleanor Harkins, in a car accident. The group's remaining members had apparently scattered afterward, leaving their revolutionary device hidden and forgotten in the transmitter, where it continued operating silently for over 2 decades. As the scientific significance of Sarah's discovery became clear, Southern Oregon University's president and board of trustees became directly involved in discussions about next steps. The university recognized that proper handling of this discovery required resources beyond what a regional institution could provide. After careful consultation with Sarah and her attorney, the university arranged a confidential meeting with representatives from major research institutions including NASA's SETI Institute, Breakthrough Listen at UC Berkeley, and the National Science Foundation. The meeting would allow presentation of authenticated findings while protecting Sarah's rights as the discoverer. The night before this crucial meeting, Sarah sat in her apartment above the radio station, one hand resting on her now 8-month pregnant belly, contemplating how dramatically her life had changed in just a few weeks. What had begun as a desperate attempt to save a failing business had transformed into stewardship of potentially the most significant scientific discovery of the century. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Dr. Chun calling with unexpected news. Sarah, we've made another breakthrough with the data analysis. The signals this device recorded aren't just non-random patterns. They contain what appears to be a deliberate, mathematical sequence building in complexity. It's exactly the kind of communication method we've theorized advanced civilizations might use to establish contact with less technologically developed societies. Are you saying this is actually? Sarah couldn't quite bring herself to finish the sentence. An intentional message from a non-terrestrial intelligence? The evidence is becoming increasingly compelling, Dr. Chun replied, his voice reflecting the magnitude of what they were discussing. The sequences begin with basic mathematical constants that would be universal pi, prime number sequences, atomic frequency ratios, before progressing to more complex information that appears to be a form of mathematical language. Sarah felt the weight of this revelation settling over her. Her small radio station hadn't just yielded an interesting piece of technology. It had potentially delivered humanity's first confirmed contact with an extraterrestrial civilization. What happens tomorrow? She asked. Tomorrow we present authenticated evidence to people with the resources and expertise to help us understand what we found, Dr. Chun answered. But Sarah, regardless of what follows, history will remember that this discovery happened because you had the courage to rebuild your life when others might have given up. Your decision to buy that radio station when it made no logical sense has potentially changed humanity's understanding of our place in the universe. The meeting the following day brought together some of the world's leading scientists in astronomy, physics, and SETI research. As Sarah watched Dr. Chun and his team present their findings, she felt a surreal disconnection from the ordinary life she had been living just weeks earlier. The assembled scientists responded with increasing amazement as the evidence was methodically presented. First, the technological authentication of the device itself, then analysis of its quantum components, and finally the structured data it had been recording for over 2 decades. What had begun as polite scientific interest transformed into electrified excitement as the implications became clear. Dr. Samantha Reynolds, director of NASA's SETI program, addressed the group after reviewing the preliminary data. If these findings are confirmed through further analysis, and the evidence presented is extraordinarily compelling, we are looking at the most significant discovery in human history. Not only have we potentially confirmed the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence, but we have what appears to be deliberate communication intended for detection. The subsequent discussion focused on establishing a comprehensive research program that would bring together the world's leading experts while maintaining appropriate confidentiality until findings could be properly verified and prepared for public release. Throughout these discussions, Sarah's rights as the discoverer were scrupulously respected, with her attorney ensuring that agreements recognized both her role and her interests. The final framework established a multi-institutional research initiative that would provide Sarah with both immediate compensation for the discovery and ongoing participation in the research process. The financial component would permanently resolve her business challenges while providing long-term security for her and her soon-to-be-born daughter. As Sarah signed the final agreements, Dr. Reynolds approached her privately. "Miss Mitchell, I want you to understand the true magnitude of what you've done. For centuries, humanity has questioned whether we're alone in the universe. Your courage in rebuilding your life against overwhelming odds has potentially given us the answer. That's a legacy few people in human history can claim." 3 months later, Sarah stood in the newly renovated broadcast booth of Harvest Radio, which now served as both a functioning community station and the public education center for what had become known as the Ashland Contact Project. Her daughter, Elena, slept peacefully in a bassinet beside the console as Sarah prepared for her daily broadcast. The station had been transformed with state-of-the-art equipment, funded by the Research Consortium as part of the Technology Preservation Initiative. The ancient transmitter that had hidden such extraordinary secrets now occupied a custom-designed display case in the station's main lobby, telling the story of how a seemingly ordinary piece of equipment had concealed humanity's first confirmed contact with an extraterrestrial civilization. Sarah's program had evolved from local agricultural education to become one of the most popular science communication broadcasts in the country, with her unique perspective as both a farmer and the discoverer of the Ashland device, giving her the ability to translate complex scientific concepts into language ordinary people could understand and appreciate. The research initiative had grown to include over 200 scientists from 27 countries, all working to understand and potentially respond to the mathematical communications recorded by the device. Preliminary analysis suggested the signals originated from a star system approximately 40 light-years from Earth, with the structured nature of the communications indicating deliberate attempt at contact rather than incidental technological emissions. The discovery had transformed scientific understanding in multiple fields. The quantum processing components were revolutionizing communications technology. The materials science was advancing manufacturing capabilities. The signal detection methodology was reshaping how humanity searched for evidence of extraterrestrial civilizations. But for Sarah, the most profound transformation had been personal. The bankruptcy that had once seemed like the end of her story had become merely the first chapter in something far more meaningful. The desperate purchase of a failing radio station that logic argued against had yielded not just financial security, but connection to something that transcended ordinary human concerns. As she adjusted her microphone and prepared to welcome listeners to the day's broadcast, Sarah glanced at her sleeping daughter and thought about the world Elena would grow up in, a world forever changed by the knowledge that humanity was not alone in the universe. A world transformed because one pregnant woman had found the courage to rebuild when it seemed easier to surrender. "Good morning, listeners," Sarah began, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had discovered her true purpose. "This is Sarah Mitchell broadcasting from Harvest Radio in Ashland, Oregon, home of the Ashland Contact Project. Today we're talking about how ordinary courage in extraordinary moments can change not just individual lives, but potentially the course of human history." She looked through the broadcast booth's window at the small town that had become the unexpected center of humanity's first confirmed contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. The same streets she had walked in despair just months earlier now hummed with the energy of scientists, researchers, and visitors from around the world. "Life rarely follows the paths we expect," Sarah continued, speaking from profound personal experience. "Sometimes our greatest challenges become doorways to discoveries we could never have imagined." Today we're joined by Dr. James Chun to discuss the latest developments in decoding the mathematical language contained in the Ashland signals, and what they might tell us about the civilization attempting to communicate across the stars. As Dr. Chun entered the booth, Sarah felt a wave of gratitude for the sequence of events that had led her to this moment. The devastating bankruptcy that had stripped away her farm. The painful divorce that had left her pregnant and alone. The desperate purchase of a failing radio station for $350. Each apparent disaster had been a necessary step toward a discovery that would forever change humanity's understanding of its place in the cosmos. The transmitter that had once represented her most pressing financial problem had contained humanity's most profound scientific discovery. The building that seemed like a foolish investment had protected technology that would transform our understanding of the universe. The bankruptcy that had appeared to end her dreams had ultimately connected her to something far greater than she could have imagined. As she welcomed her listeners to another broadcast from the center of humanity's first contact with extraterrestrial intelligence, Sarah Mitchell knew that her daughter would grow up understanding a profound truth, that courage in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges could yield discoveries that transcended not just personal circumstances, but potentially the course of human history itself. The pregnant farmer who had purchased a failed radio station for $350 had discovered not just alien communications hidden in the broadcast room, but the extraordinary capacity of the human spirit to transform apparent endings into beginnings, of far greater significance than anyone could have possibly imagined. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.